It's Wednesday night, and I wrestle with what to preach on Wednesday night because all this goes together. I was over there in Hebrews, the 3rd and 4th chapter. I was teaching in Hebrews. They got to the point where the people were murmuring against God. Murmuring against God. And they did that all the time they were over here in the wilderness. And I got to thinking, I need to go back over here to the wilderness. If this is the Mediterranean Sea here, and this is Israel, and this is Egypt over here, and this would be the Red Sea in here, then you'd have this would be a little throughway here, and then you had the Sinai Peninsula over here. And then I decided to go back and kind of cover Moses leading the children of Israel across the Red Sea into the Sinai Peninsula, taking them down here to Mount Sinai, and then wandering through the wilderness for 40 years, which is a picture of us going through our lifetime. And they murmured against God, we murmured against God, and we have to come to the realization that God has ordained all things to be as they are. When you get miserable, do you ever have a hard time in life? A hard time where you just say, I don't know what to do. You know what you do? Keep going. That's what you do. There's no place to get off. There's no place to stop the world and say, let me off. No place. There's no place for quitting. I don't always feel good when I'm up here preaching. I don't particularly feel good tonight. But that has nothing to do with I'm going to meet my responsibility or not. Nothing. I've learned that years ago. If you can learn that, if you keep going, we'll reap a reward in due time if we faint not. There in Galatians, the 6th chapter. Faint is the word kolax. It means to relax. If you don't relax, just keep going, okay? And you'll be all right. Because you will reap a reward in due time if we faint not. It's amazing we don't have large crowds on Wednesday night and Sunday night, because a lot of people travel a long distance on Sunday morning to get this message. And they love the predestination. God doesn't love everybody, and Christmas is pagan, and Easter is pagan, and baptism is blood, not water. And they weren't eating communion like in these churches. They were eating the last Passover, and now in a spiritual Passover. And that's a message all in itself. But what you do is we keep going. Back when we started this ministry, it started in my living room, or actually my den where I used to live, where Scott and Dee is living now. And that's where it started, and we only had 3 and 4 and 5 people for 6 or 7 years. That's all we had. And then we had one guy come, and he said, I think I can get this on TV, and he started filming it, and it multiplied. Now, we don't have much more on Wednesday night than we had back then, but we are on TV in Los Angeles, San Bernardino, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Beaumont, San Antonio. We're on TV all over the country. Boston, New York, all 5 boroughs of New York. And most of our congregation is out there in the world. And we're reaping a reward, and we're paying for all that TV. Well, not all of it. A lot of it's public access. We're paying for all the lease access, and that runs us up close to $11,000 a month. And so we're reaping a reward, even though we haven't increased in a lot of people here on Sunday night, Wednesday night. We do have a good crowd, pretty good crowd on Sunday morning. But this is all you can expect to have when you are preaching this message. It's all you can expect, the most you can expect. Now, I've been thinking about, we've gone through Genesis. It took us about 3 years to go through Genesis. We went through things in there that you've never heard taught in your life, and I'm absolutely sure of that. And then we went through Genesis, Exodus. We got up to the 32nd chapter of Exodus, and I veered over here for some reason. And then I came back and taught on Numbers. And along the way, I'd teach some on Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I'd teach on Deuteronomy. And then I got to telling everybody, Moses started coming out of Egypt in Exodus. He was born in Exodus, the 2nd chapter, and Moses dies in the 33rd chapter of Deuteronomy. Now, it's attributed to Moses that he wrote what we call Pentateuch, or they call the Torah. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. Pent means 5. A pentagram is a 5-pointed star. Pent is 5. And Moses did write this. The only thing is he didn't write the last chapter because he dies in the last chapter. I don't know how he could have written that. But I've been wanting to show you something about the life of Moses. There is a man that gives us a lot about Moses. Now, if you ever wonder where the information comes from in some of these movies they make about Moses, and you've had many films on the 10 Commandments. The first one I saw was with Charlton Moses Heston. They did some really bad things in that. I mean, it's real stupid to think. It's real dumb to think all these million people are exiting Egypt, and there's 2 great big walls of water that they walk through, and I can see the children of Israel walking through that, but having an army of the Pharaoh walk down between these great big walls of water, knowing a God pulled them up there, no, that's not true. That can't be true. It's like one of the writers said, this was a very large sea, the Red Sea. It's right here. This is all the Red Sea, but they came across up here, and it was still a lot of space. So it was probably God had caused the waters to recede, and with a great wind, he had dried it up like it was dry dirt. And then the next day they go walking down in there, but you couldn't see the water. So when the soldiers got down there, they see this tidal wave coming. There's no way they can get to the shore in time. They had to be fooled to walk down in that, because you wouldn't do that otherwise. And there's other things that they'll come up with and say that along the way I'll be showing you how they're not true. Now, when you look at one of those movies like the 10 Commandments that Cecil B. DeMille did back in the late 50s. When you look at that, it'll show Moses as a military leader in Egypt. Well, according to Josephus, that's true. That's where this information comes from, Josephus. Now, that's not Bocephus. Bocephus is a nickname for Hank Williams Jr. And I'm quite sure Hank Williams, when he called him that, he was trying to say Josephus, so he's playing off of that. Josephus is probably the most prominent historian in history at that time. He lived in the 1st century when Israel was coming, when they're being attacked by the Romans. Let me read you something about Josephus. You can take this off the internet. Josephus, they gave him the title Titus Flavius Josephus. Titus Flavius Josephus. Probably one of the most renowned and respected historians that we've ever had. This is a picture of him here. You can't hardly see it, but there's a picture of him. Very extremely intelligent man. He retained a lot of the things that's in the Bible. The Bible will give you a short synopsis of something. He will go into, I'm not saying his works are inspired, but reading Josephus is just like picking up one of these commentaries or this Isidore Singer encyclopedia and reading it. It is information. If there is a mistake in history or in some guy recording history, that can be a legitimate mistake. But Josephus is highly respected, a man who recorded history. Now let me read you something about Josephus. He was born Yosef ben Mattiyahu, and he was a first century Romano Jewish scholar, historian, and hagiographer who was born in Jerusalem. Hagiographer comes from graphe, comes from hagios. A hagiographer, H-A-G-I-A-G-R-A-P-H-E-R. Hagiographer comes from hagios, which is the word holy, and graphe means to write. It's a holy writer. It's one who writes about Israel. So that's what he was, a hagiographer. To a father of priestly descent and a mother who claimed royal ancestry. He initially fought against the Romans during the First Jewish-Roman War as a head of Jewish forces in Galilee, until surrendering in 67 CE, Christian era, CE, 67. Now remember that in 70 CE or AD, 70 AD will be the total destruction of Jerusalem, and he's fighting this battle, Mr. Josephus is. He's fighting in these battle for independence from Rome. Well, remember in 70 AD is when Titus, the Roman general, come in and utterly annihilated Israel in 70 AD. And his father was Vespasian, V-E-S-P-A-S-I-A-N. Vespasian was a barbarous emperor in Rome. Now listen to Mr. Josephus, what he did. To Roman forces led by Vespasian after the 6-week siege of Jotapata, Josephus claimed the Jewish messianic prophecies that initiated the first Roman Jewish war made reference to Vespasian becoming emperor of Rome. In response, Vespasian decided to keep Josephus as a slave and an interpreter. After Vespasian became emperor in 69 CE, he granted Josephus his freedom, at which time Josephus assumed the emperor's family name of Flavius. Flavius Josephus fully defected to the Roman side and was granted Roman citizenship. That's after Israel was conquered. It would do no good to fight against Rome. He became an advisor and friend of Vespasian's son Titus, serving as his translator when Titus led the siege of Jerusalem. That's right at the end of Jerusalem's history in 70 AD. Previous years to that, just a few years, they were under the siege of the Roman enemies. Since the siege proved ineffective at stopping the Jewish revolt, the city's destruction and the looting and destruction of Herod's temple soon followed. Josephus recorded Jewish history with special emphasis on first century Christian era, CE, and the first Jewish-Roman war, including the siege of Masada. That was over there by the Dead Sea. It was a mountain by the Dead Sea, and they'd get up on it, and people couldn't get up there. Didn't have repelling hooks, and didn't have helicopters, so they would hide up there until there was a great slaughter that came about, and a lot of the Jews committed suicide rather than being tortured by the Romans. His most important works were the Jewish War and Antiquities of the Jews. Now, I've got some of my information out of my book, Antiquities of the Jews. The Jewish War recounts the Jewish revolt against Roman occupation. Antiquities of the Jews recounts the history of the world from Jewish perspective for an ostensibly Roman audience. These works provide valuable insight into first century Judaism and background of early Christianity. Now, I'm not going to read his biography. Just wanted to kind of introduce you to Mr. Josephus, because he's going to expand on what we study in the book of where Moses is born. Let's go back to Exodus. I can't teach Moses' death without telling you something about the law. Moses is given the credit for having written down the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, other than that last chapter where it says Moses died in a good old age. Now, but I want to show you how you can study other books just like we study commentaries. You can actually study Josephus and get some very interesting things. Now, Moses is born in the 2nd chapter of Exodus. In the 1st chapter of Exodus, there's a king that rises up in verse 8 of the 1st chapter. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. The word knew is the word yada. It means to have any kind of personal relationship with Joseph. This king had to come up sometime after Joseph. It didn't mean he wasn't familiar with him. Everyone that had ever ruled in Egypt was familiar with Joseph, because Joseph had saved Egypt from the great famines under the Pharaoh when he was in Egypt. Now, there were many pharaohs. Pharaoh is a title just like Caesar. It's not a name. And we do not know who the Pharaoh was when Moses left Egypt. Some say it was Tutmos II, T-U-T-M-O-S-E II. We're not real sure. Along the way, I'll give you some of these pharaohs. And you really need to understand Moses' situation, because there's things that he did that are not going to tell you in the Bible. From a historical standpoint, he was a great Egyptian general from Josephus' writings, that he was a tremendous, not only a scholarly man, but a great fighter in their army, leading men as a general in Egypt. Now, Mr. Josephus said that Amram and Jochebed, Amram, and J-O-C-H-A-B-E-D, pronounced like a Y-A, Jochebed. Jochebed and Amram, this was Moses' father. Moses' had a brother 3 years older than him, and that was Aaron. And had a sister that was already older than both of them. That was Miriam. And God chose Moses to lead the children of Israel, and he chose Aaron to be the priest, high priest of Israel. And all of Aaron's sons would be high priests. And Moses didn't have, he was just their leader and the one that met with God. No one had ever met with God face to face and talked to God like Moses. That's what that last chapter of Deuteronomy says. I want you to see some things here about Moses. These prophets, these two prophets prophesied a deliverer of Israel out of Egypt before Moses was born. And when Moses was born, they believed he was it. So the Pharaoh, that was Pharaoh at that time, Israel began to multiply. Everywhere they went, they would multiply. When they were carried away into captivity over here to Babylon, they began to multiply. They were set loose over there, And even after these three emperors of Persia, Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, even these men gave them decrees to go back over here to Israel and rebuild the temple and rebuild the city. Most of them didn't want to. Why didn't they want to? They were set free over here by these Persian kings, and they began to multiply. Everywhere Israel went, they began to multiply, just overwhelmingly. Well, this is what is happening in this first chapter of Exodus. They're multiplying at breakneck speed, and Mr. Josephus is going to tell you about it. And the midwives, that was a title for a woman who delivered babies. And they got the instruction that every male child was to be put into the river and drowned and fed to the crocodiles. Well, of course, they were afraid of God, the midwives are. So they would say, well, these are lively women and they have these babies before we can get to them. And, of course, that wasn't it. They were sparing their lives. And then it came to where the Pharaoh put tremendous pressure upon them, and Moses was kept. He was born and kept in the house for a while, and then then Moses' sister Miriam, remember Miriam, his older sister, she took him down to the river, and she put him in the river. They put him in an ark. And it doesn't mean something like Noah's Ark. It was a little basket for a baby, and they would pitch it within, without, with pitch. Now that word pitch is the word chemer. In all probability, it was the same kind of pitch. The pitch was used to keep boats from sinking. So they put Moses in the bulrushes. That's these flags in the river. And it began to float down the river, and Miriam followed that little basket, and it came up to where Pharaoh's daughter, just so happened, Pharaoh's daughter was bathing by the river, and she took it. And what amazes me, she took the baby and said she wanted to be hers, and she didn't have any children, and she raised it as a royal prince in the court of the Pharaoh. That's why he ended up as a powerful general, fighter, and I've learned something myself reading this, but let me read something to you here. Moses went through a development in Egypt. Let me show you where he started. He started in Egypt in Exodus. In Exodus, that first chapter. Now, Moses' life is divided into three parts. He's born in Exodus, second chapter, birth. And that's from birth until he sees one of his own Jewish brothers he saw one man, a Jew, kill another one, and he saw some Egyptians. He was afraid these Egyptians would find out about him killing this man. Moses kills a man. Well, he was afraid of being caught, so this is the first. At 40 years old, he leaves Egypt and goes over to the land right over here outside of the land of Goshen. Now, when he goes over to Goshen, Joseph, when he's over there, says the land of Goshen. It was Joseph, 400 years prior to Moses, that brought his father, 70 of his family, over to Egypt, because they were in Egypt for 400 years. And Joseph said, I will give my father and all these 70 family members, I'll give him the land of Goshen because it is the richest. Well, that's where he went to. That is right near the land of Midian. So Joseph spends 40 years over here in the land of Midian. And so his first 40 years is this second chapter. Second chapter. That's the first 40 years. Then when he's in Midian, that's the next 40 years. That's the part I want to fill in, where he has a life there in Egypt, and he works his way up to being a prince of Egypt. And he's raised in the house of the daughter of the Pharaoh. No one had better opportunities. Remember what Hebrews 11 says. Look at Hebrews 11. Moses was a privileged man, being raised as a prince. When they call him a prince in these movies, that's what he was in Hebrews. And he is raised by the daughter of Pharaoh over here in Hebrews. I love this part of it right here because this applies to us. Applies to us. Well, I'm flipping the wrong way. Excuse me. All right. Let's read this because this is going to go along with what we're talking about. In Hebrews 11, verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents. They hid him 3 months before they put him in that little ark. See, you got to match the New Testament with the Old. Because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Said, I don't want this. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God 40 years in the wilderness than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept this Passover and the sprinkling of blood. That's in the 12th chapter of Exodus. That's the first Passover. Lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, when the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. That's in the 14th chapter of Exodus. They were drowned in the 14th chapter. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. Now go back over here. Let's go back over here. I just want to introduce you to Moses and some of the things he went through. Now, all right, where do I need to go here? Let's just start from verse 1 of chapter 2. There went a man of the house of Levi, and took to him a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. That's what Hebrews, the 11th chapter says, doesn't it? Hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, with chemer, C-H-E-M-E-R. It's a red stained dye. And put the child therein, and she laid it on the flags, the bulrushes. We call them flags down in South Texas. That's where they're shooting up around the shallow waters, and they have big fluffy things on the end of them. And his sister stood afar off. That has to be Miriam. He's a little bitty baby, so we know she's considerably older than him. His sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. This is what's going to make him a prince. When you see these movies and you see Moses leading armies, he was. And her maidens walked along by the river's side, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Say, go get that basket there. When she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children that they're trying to cause him to escape the sword of Pharaoh, my father. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrews' women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maid went and called Moses' own mother. Wonder if that was an accident. It's going to nurse real easy at its mother's breast. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter. He became her son. Oh, that's going to give him royalty. And she called his name Moses. And she said, because I drew him out of the water. Moses means to draw out. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out into his brethren and looked on their burdens, the Hebrews. He went over into the land of Goshen. He took a little short trip. And spied on the Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked his way this way and that, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he digs up some sand and hides him there and thinks he's going to get away with it. And when he went out the second day, behold, two men of the Hebrews strove together. Moses killed that man because he's striking a Hebrew. And he said unto him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince? The queen of Egypt did. And a judge over us, intendest thou to kill us, as thou killest the Egyptian? Oop, the word is out. It's all through the Hebrew camp. And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Now everybody knows it. I got to get out of here. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And they came to Reuel their father. Reuel, what? R-E-U-E-L. Now, this is another name for Jethro. They're this one and the same. Now, you've got Jethro mentioned several times in the Bible. All through Exodus, he's going to be there to help Moses at every turn. You have to realize that. And you got to realize that Jethro, he had another name in Numbers 10:29. Look at Numbers 10:29. Numbers 10 and 29. Numbers 10 is where they're about to leave the mountain at Sinai. This is where they're leaving. Moses has already gone up on the mountain, gotten all the the commandments of God and the instructions how to build the tabernacle at this point. In verse 29, Moses said unto Hobab, the son of Raguel. That's just another way to spell Rael. Raguel. That's a different way of spelling it. It's the same thing as Jethro. So anytime you're going to look this up, let's read on here. And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand, talking about Moses, out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, and where is this Egyptian? Moses is who we're talking about. Why is it by this time you're going to gather that Moses is not a pushover when it comes to fighting? He's a great warrior by this point. But there's other things that's been happening in Egypt with him that the Bible doesn't tell us about. It's just historical accounts. Left and called him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter. Now, according to Josephus' account, he already had another wife. And she was an Ethiopian. She was Ethiopian. If you get a copy of Josephus, it's well worth reading. He said unto his daughters, where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. And for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king died. So Moses knows he can go back. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by the reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect to them. Now, when you get to the next chapter, you're getting to Moses and the burning bush, and this is 40 years after he kills this man and runs away from Egypt. So you're getting down here. He's killing the man here. 40 years, and he sees God in the burning bush in the 3rd chapter. Burning bush. Now, let me read you something about Moses' life in Mr. Hold on here. All right. Hold on a second. I got so much information here, and I want you to hear some of this. Now, the development of Moses in Egypt. I'm going to read this out of Josephus. So it comes up through here. So by the time you start Exodus, the 3rd chapter, you're in the 3rd 40 years. And right immediately there, God's going to send the 10 judgments on Egypt, 10 judgments. And when he sends these, after the 10th judgment, Pharaoh's heart will be softened. He'll let the people go, and then God immediately will harden his heart again, and that's when he chases them over to the Red Sea and says he's going to kill them all. What is the 10th judgment?
Death of the firstborn.
Huh?
Death of the firstborn.
Huh?
Death of the firstborn.
Oh, the Passover. Fourth judgment is death of the firstborn of the Passover. Passover. And then they leave Egypt. They come to the Red Sea in Exodus 14. God gets Pharaoh and his armies down in the bottom of the Red Sea. The reason they couldn't get away, he pulls their chariot wheels off and says, now drive against my people. So God kills Pharaoh and his armies down here in the Red Sea. But I want to read some things to you about this man Moses. Now it happened that the Egyptian grew delicate and lazy as to painstaking, and gave themselves up. It's talking about all the Egyptians. The Egyptians grew lazy and painstaking, and gave themselves up to other pleasures, in particular the love of gain, money. They also became very ill affected against the Hebrews, as touched with envy at their prosperity. For when they saw how the nation of Israelites flourished, were become eminent already in plenty of wealth, which had acquired by their virtue and natural love of labor, they thought their increase was to their own detriment. Now, why didn't the Bible put all these details in there? Well, it's like Mr. Archer said, one of the great writers. He said, God will give us enough that we need to bring us to understand Him. We don't need every detail about everything, what they did and what they ate every meal, and where they built and what size house they built. They thought their increase was to their own detriment, and having a length of time forgotten benefits they had received from Joseph, particularly the crown being now come into another family, they became very abusive to the Israelites. They didn't want to lose it to this Moses, and contrived many ways of afflicting them, for they enjoined them to cut a great number of channels for the river, and to build walls for their cities and ramparts, that they might restrain the river and hinder its waters from stagnating. They did this with the Euphrates River also. They built the writers, the historians tell us, they built a canal between the Tigris and Euphrates, and a lot of the rich Jews moved to that area. And that's why they didn't want to come back, because they were prospering so greatly over there. And they set them also to build pyramids, and by all this wore them out, and forced them to learn all sorts of mechanical arts, and to accustom themselves to hard labor. That's why the Egyptians were lazy. They were employing the Hebrews to do the work that they didn't want to do. Sit back and dictate to them and whip them with whips and so forth. And 400 years did they spend under these afflictions. 400 years. Now, there's people try to say Israel was in Egypt 200 years. Mr. Josephus says they were there 400 years. They were afflicted. They try to come up and say, well, there was 400 years from Abraham. This is what people have said. Mr. Josephus says that's wrong. The Southern Baptists will say, well, it was 200 years. It was 400 years from Abraham through the end of Joseph's life, and 400 years through Joseph and all of the affliction. I don't really want to go into this, but I want to show you a verse over there in the 15th chapter of Genesis. It couldn't have been. They were under affliction 400 years. Josephus says so, and the Bible says so. But the Southern Baptists want to say from Abraham until the end of the bondage was 400 years. Abraham was never in affliction. Isaac was never in affliction. Jacob wasn't in affliction. Joseph brought Jacob over, and it wasn't until after Joseph that the 400 years came along. Look over here in Genesis, the 15th chapter. You'll have Baptists, or the Baptist scholars will say, they were in Egypt. They were in Egypt. They try to make it a total of 400 years, from Abraham all the way through the bondage. Look here in Genesis 15. Genesis, the 15th chapter. And this is the Lord addressing Abraham, telling him, you're going to have a son out of your own bowels. In verse 13, and God said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs. It certainly can't be Israel. And shall serve them, and shall afflict them 400 years. And you got it over there in the 12th chapter of Exodus also, that they would be afflicted. Abraham was never afflicted in Egypt. He went over to Egypt. He told his wife, you are so beautiful, you need to tell these people that you are my sister so they won't kill me so they can have you. Well, that night Pharaoh had a dream. And God spoke to him in a dream that said, don't you touch this man's wife. And then the Pharaoh comes to back to Abraham and says, why didn't you tell me this? Why did you say she was your sister? Get out of my precincts, get out of my area, go. Abraham wasn't under affliction. Neither was Isaac under affliction. Jacob wasn't actually under affliction. It wasn't until this new Pharaoh rose up that did not, it don't mean he wasn't familiar with Joseph. He was in their history, but he didn't know him like a friend. So he said, let's kill all the babies that are born. Now, back over here to Exodus. All right, well, let me get back to reading this to you. While the affairs of the Hebrews were in this condition, there was this occasion offered itself to the Egyptians, which made them more solicitous for the extinction of our nation. One of these sacred scribes, who are very sagacious, sagacious means they're wise men. It comes from, we get the word saga, or a sage. A sage was a wise man. In foretelling future events, truly told the king that about this time there would be a child born to the Israelites, who, if he were reared, would bring the Egyptian dominion low, and would raise the Israelites, that he would excel all men in virtue, talking about Moses, and obtain a glory that would be remembered through all ages. And Moses certainly was remembered. Which thing was so feared by the king that, according to this man's opinion, he commanded that they should cast every male child which was born to the Israelites into the river and destroy it, that beside this, the Egyptian midwives, which labors of the Hebrew women, observe what is born, for those were the women who were enjoined to the office of midwives to them, by reason of their relation to the king, would not transgress his commands. And that's when they turned around and started saying they're lively women, and they bear children awful quick. Now let me read to you what happens with Moses before the first 40 years is up. It's when Moses rises to power as a prince of Egypt. He brings this out in here, and this is what happens with him, with Moses. And this is where these men will get a lot of the writers of these epics that they make about the Bible, they'll get it out of history. And a lot of it comes out of Josephus. Now, I'm going to read something. This is what happens. It couldn't have happened any other time than the first 40 years. From his birth to where he kills that man and runs away. Because when he comes back to deliver the children of Israel, and he's not going to be a military man in this second 40 years or this third 40 years, because at the end of the third 40 years is the end of their time in Egypt. That's the end of the bondage. So the only place this could be would be the first 40 years. Let me read you Mr. Josephus' account of what happened that first 40 years. Moses, therefore, when he was born and brought up in the foregoing manner, came to an age of maturity, made his virtue manifest to the Egyptian, and showed that he was born for the bringing them down. In raising the Israelites, and the occasion he laid hold of was this: the Ethiopians, which is right below Egypt, the Ethiopians, who are next neighbors to the Egyptians, made an inroad into their country, which they seized upon and carried off the effects of the Egyptians. So this is an attack upon Egypt by the Ethiopians, who in their rage fought against them and revenged the affronts they had received from them. But being overcome in battle, some of them were slain, talking about the Ethiopians. The rest ran away in a shameful manner, and by that means saved themselves. Whereupon the Ethiopians followed after them in pursuit, and thinking that it would be a mark of cowardice if they did not subdue all of Egypt. So this is the attack of the Ethiopians against Egypt. They went on to subdue the rest with great vehemence, and when they had tasted the sweets of the country, they never left off the prosecution of the war. And as the nearest parts had not courage enough at first to fight with them, they proceeded as far as Memphis, that's in Egypt, and the sea itself. We get Memphis, Tennessee from Egypt. It's an Egyptian name, because Memphis was one of their gods. While not one of the cities was able to oppose them, the Egyptians, under this sad oppression, betook themselves to their oracles and prophecies. And when God had given them this counsel to make use of Moses the Hebrew and take his assistance, the king commanded his daughter to produce him, that he might be the general of their army. Moses is going to be the commander of the Egyptian army, and he goes to war with the Ethiopians. Upon which, when she had made him swear he would do him no harm, she delivered him to the king. The king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, is afraid of Moses. He has such magnetism about him. He is this mighty warrior. He's not some pansy guy. He couldn't speak. He said, I'm a man of a thick tongue and I can't hardly talk. But that didn't mean he's a pansy, because he couldn't have been a leading general if he hadn't have really had something on the ball. And supposed his assistance would be a great advantage to them. She withal reproached the priest, who, when they had become admonished the Egyptians to kill him, was not ashamed now to own their want of his help. They wanted Moses. Evidently, he had some kind of powerful personality. So Moses, at the persuasion both of Thermuthis and the king himself, cheerfully undertook the business to be their military leader. And the sacred tribes of both nations were glad, those of the Egyptians, that they would at once overcome their enemies by his great valor. He was a fighter. And that by the same piece of management Moses would be slain. They thought, we'll get him out here in the middle of the battle and we'll have him killed off. But those of the Hebrews, that they should escape from the Egyptians, because Moses was to be their general. But Moses prevented the enemies and took and led his army before these enemies were surprised of his attacking them, for he did not march by the river, but by the land, and they expected him to come by the river, where he gave a wonderful demonstration of his sagacity. For when the ground, he was a great tactician, and was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents which it produces in vast numbers, and indeed is singular in some of those productions which other countries do not breed, and yet such as are worse than others in power and mischief, and unusual fierceness of sight, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen. They just all of a sudden appear. Well, that's the way those sidewinders are. They crawl up under the sand and they make an S shape as they crawl. And also fly in the air, and so came upon men at unawares and do them a mischief. Moses invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve the army safe and without hurt. For he made baskets like unto arks of sedge, and filled them with ibes, and carried them along with them. Now, I don't know what the ibes are. They explain it down here in the footnotes. All right. Which animal is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable? For they fly from them when they come near them. And it's just like the mongoose is the most fierce animal to a serpent. They will kill a cobra. They're just little skinny animals. And the squirrels are immune to rattlesnake venom. I saw a special on squirrels, and these rattlesnakes are popping and snapping at them. They didn't care. They just kept attacking them. And as they fly, they are caught and devoured by them as if it were done by the hearts. But the ibes are tame creatures and only enemies to the serpentine kind. But about these ibes I say no more at present, since the Greeks themselves are not unacquainted with this sort of bird. These are a bird, form of a bird. As soon therefore, in fact, I saw a bird attacking a cobra the other night on the TV on a special, and the cobra didn't have any chance. It would just pick its eyes out and pick it all to pieces. And Moses came into the land which was a breeder of these serpents, and he let loose the ibes, and their means repelled the serpentine kind, and used them for his assistance before the army came upon the ground. When he came upon the Ethiopians before they expected him, and joining the battle with them, he beat them and deprived them of the hopes they had of the success against the Egyptians, and went on and overthrowing their cities. So Moses, leading the armies of Egypt, overthrows the Ethiopians, and indeed made a great slaughter of these Ethiopians. Now when the Egyptian army had once tasted of this prosperous success by the means of Moses, they did not slacken their diligence, insomuch that the Ethiopians were in danger of being reduced to slavery and all sorts of destruction. And at length they retired to Saba, which was a royal city of Ethiopia, when Cambyses, afterwards named Meroe, after the name of his own sister. The place was to be besieged with very difficulty, since it is both encompassed by the Nile, talking about Ethiopia, and since it was both encompassed by the Nile quite around and other rivers. Astapus and Astabarus made it difficult for such as attempted to pass over them. For the city was situate in a retired place, and was inhabited after the manner of an island, being encompassed with a strong wall, having the rivers to guard them from their enemies, and having great ramparts between the wall and the rivers, insomuch that when the waters came with the greatest violence, it could never be drowned. It didn't matter what kind of torrents came, which ramparts made it next to impossible for even such are gotten over the rivers. However, while Moses was uneasy at the armies lying idle, for the enemies durst come to the battle, this accident happened. Tharbis was the daughter of the king of the Ethiopians. Tharbis, Tharbis. This is very interesting. This answers a puzzle that I've had in my mind. Tharbis. She was the princess. She was the king's daughter of the Ethiopians. So watch what happens. She happened to see Moses as he led the army near the walls. Very impressed with him. Fell in love with him, love at first sight. And fought with great courage. This is her speaking of Moses. And admiring the subtlety of his undertakings and believing him to be the author of the Egyptians' success. When they had before despaired of recovering their liberty, to be occasion of great danger the Ethiopians were in, when they had before boasted of their great achievements, she fell deeply in love with Moses. The Bible says that Aaron and Miriam got angry at Moses because he was married to an Ethiopian woman. This has to be her here. This was before Zipporah. Zipporah had to be his second wife. And upon the prevalency of that passion, sent to him the most faithful. She's impressed with this general. That is her enemy, and he is so good in battle and so handsome, or whatever it is. She fell in love with him and said, I want him for me. And she is the daughter of the enemy king. And to him most faithful, all her servants to discourse with him about their marriage. All she did was see him. He thereupon accepted the offer on condition she would procure the delivering up of the city. You surrender your city, and I'll marry you. And give her the assurance of an oath to take her to wife, and that when he had once taken possession of the city, he would not break his oath to her. No sooner was the agreement made, but it took effect immediately. And when Moses had cut off the Ethiopians, he gave thanks to God and consummated his marriage, and they led the Egyptians back to their own land. He was truly a great military leader. This had to have happened during that first 40 years, right before he killed the Egyptian, because it couldn't have happened in here. That's when he's living in the land of Midian, meeting Zipporah. Now, I don't know where that other wife is, but we have a reference to her over here in Numbers, the 9th chapter. Go over there. What's up, Numbers 9? Numbers 11. I'll find it here in a minute. Okay, Numbers 12. Now, this could not be talking about Zipporah, because Zipporah was not an Ethiopian. The Ethiopian was the princess of Egypt. I had to read all that to get to this point. This had to be a reference. Zipporah was a Midianite. She's from this area up in here. Ethiopia's down here. When he was down here fighting this battle, being this great soldier, general, leader, it would take a real leader to lead somebody out in the wilderness, 1 million plus, 2 million people, and go out here with no water and no food and say, I'm going to trust in God. Moses was truly one of the great, great men of God. Now, in the 12th chapter of Numbers, and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. I didn't see that till I started reading Josephus this time. I've been reading on Josephus off and on. The Ethiopian he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. That was the princess of Ethiopia. That sometimes one of these historians will tell us something, we can't find the answer. We say, oh, God didn't tell us all about that. But the point is, God was pleased with his marriage. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken by us? And the Lord heard it. Aaron and Miriam are talking racism here. They didn't like it because he had married an Ethiopian woman. And this is not couldn't be talking about Zipporah. She's not an Ethiopian. Has to be talking about that princess of Ethiopia. And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. He wasn't very meek in battle, but as far as standing, talking one-on-one, he is a very gentle, quiet man. He even told God, Lord, I can't talk. I got a thick tongue. God says, Aaron will be your prophet. He'll talk for you. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, unto Aaron, unto Miriam, come out ye three unto the tabernacle of the congregation. I want to talk to you. They're angry because he married a black woman. That's what they're angry at. And God says, that's my business. He is my man. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. I guess they would. Whew. God is angry in a rage at them, speaking against Moses. And he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth. I'll talk to Moses face to face. Well, that last chapter of Deuteronomy said no one ever lived that talked to God face to face like Moses. My servant Moses is not so. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark sentences, not in words that cannot be understood. He'll understand every word I say. I believe that's the word kiddah, means puzzling. Q-I-D-D-A-H. Q-I-D-D-A-H. That's the same thing as the king of fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences, puzzling questions. I will speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in puzzling conundrums, riddles. I won't talk to Moses that way. I'll tell him something exactly, and he'll answer me back. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore, then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? His marriage is up to me, not you. Wherefore were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. She had to be the guilty party. And Aaron listened to his older sister when he should have kept his mouth shut. You speak against the man of God, you're taking a chance on your life. I'm saying that for people who have left here, lied about me. If I am the man of God, if you get hit in the head with a ball bat, that's not me. That's God. If I truly am the man of God, if I were you, I would be afraid. I've had people lie, say things about me that was as far from the truth as the east is from the west. I'd be frightened if I were you. God's liable to kill you, strike you with some disease. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle. Behold, Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not this sin upon us, when we have done foolishly. Well, if you don't start confessing when you're going after the man of God, you are doing foolishly. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when she cometh out of her mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, spit in the face. I'll read that to you here in a minute. Had spit in her face, she should not be ashamed 7 days. Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. Let me read this article to you about spitting in the face. This was a custom of the Jews. Spitting was a ceremony introduced into baptism in the early church. The candidate was required not only to renounce the devil in word, but also by act and gesture. The catechumens or instructions was brought into the baptistry and placed with his face to the west. A form of words was used by which he renounced the devil. He then stretched out his hands and spat as if he in defiance of him. This was thrice repeated. He then turned the cast and entered in the covenant with Christ. Well, there was something earlier on spitting than that, because we don't believe in water baptism. Use of the saliva. The same intention of acknowledging kinship, of bestowing it ceremonially through the contact with the child, was something belonging to the kinsman, is seen in several rites where the child is rubbed with saliva, a relative is spat upon, and actual examples in connection with giving of a name are found among it. And he talks about the Mandingos and Bombaras of West Africa, priests spitting thrice in a child's face. Fourth day after the child is born, the priest presents it to the ancestral spirits and begs their favor for it, and accompanying each special request by spitting on the child's body and pinching it. Muhammad is said to have done the same when he named his grandson Hassan of the Saracens, and Perseus in his satires ridicules the women relative who rubs the baby's forehead with saliva when it receives its name for the Roman custom. The practice survives in the use of spittle in baptism in the early church among the Roman Catholics and so forth. Remember when the man was brought to Jesus and he was blind from birth in Mark 9, and Jesus spit upon the ground and rubbed his eyes? This was a custom or a cultural thing back then. And he opened his eyes and he said, I can see. And when the Pharisees came along and they said, who healed you on the Sabbath day? He said, oh, this man here. He told me to come over to him, and he spit in the sand and rubbed it in the sand, put it on my eyes, and I can see. This was one of their cultural customs, except when Jesus did it, the blindness goes away. Now, all right. Now I want us to go back over here. I'm trying to give you a little introduction to Moses. I want to show you some things about his family, about Jethro, his father-in-law. Now this man is called Jethro. He's called Jethro all through Exodus 3 and 1. He has other names. He's called Raul and Raguel. These are names that was given to the father-in-law of Moses. It's very important to understand this man Jethro. Jethro is the man that was always there for Moses, or Raguel, whatever one you want to call him. Look over here in Exodus, the 3rd chapter. Exodus 3rd chapter. Jethro became like a father to to Moses, excuse me. He became like a father. Moses needed an advisor, and Jethro was always there until Moses left and went on his journeys. Look back here at Exodus, the 3rd chapter. Now, sometimes it will simply say Moses' father-in-law. It won't say his name. And you'll see how much he is through the book of Exodus. He's like a father. Moses needed an old, wise old man to help him. In fact, when he came down out of the mountain, after talking to God and seeing the burning bush, it was Jethro that came along and told him, "You need some help, Moses. You need 70 men to be judges in Israel." Why did he need judges in Israel? Because they go out here in the desert, and it's estimated there were like 2 million men that went into the desert, men, women, and children, like 2 million out there. And Moses has got to do everything for all of them, all of the rituals, anything they had. Of course, that's all been blotted out now. And he just didn't have enough to go around. They had to feed all these people. They had to gather acres, hundreds of acres of manna in the morning and doves in the evening and prepare them to eat them. They needed help. And these 70 that Jethro suggested to Moses, it is believed that they became the Sanhedrin. Of course, they were twisted. The Sanhedrin is the 70 judging, ruling council, and they would gather in a semicircle like so, and the man who's accused would be standing in front of the semicircle, and there would be 70 men here. And it's believed that that started with Jethro when he said, "You need some help to overlook all these people." Now, Moses was an unusual man. He's a great warrior, a great leader, enough to impress this Ethiopian princess. She says, "Man, I like that guy, and he's my enemy." And she wanted to marry him, just seeing him out there fighting. Something else, wasn't it? Look here in Exodus 3 and 1. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Horeb is the same thing as Sinai. To Horeb, he led the flock even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. Now this is where it all starts right here. Moses is 80 years old here. We know that because he's 40 years in the wilderness, isn't he? And the Bible says he's 120 years old. How do you know this is 40? He comes back at 80. We know he comes back at 80 because they're 40 years in the wilderness, and when they come out of the wilderness, Moses is 120. So right as they're going into the wilderness, he's 80 years old, right? Right? He's 80. So when he left, he's 40 when he leaves. When he left after killing this guy, that's when he's 40. Then he spends 40 years as this general fighting, leading Egyptian in their battles. And he leaves Egypt at 80. And when he gets to the end of his journey, this all goes together. Remember, in Numbers 20, Moses is forbidden from entering into the land of promise. Do you know I've wrestled with that year after year after year? God could have caused Moses not to have gotten angry at the people and smiting that rock. But he didn't. God evidently wanted Moses on this side of the river. If this is Moses is 40 years in the wilderness. These are things that I think about a lot. And I'm wondering, why did God let him smite that rock twice when God told him to speak to the rock? And God said, just because you smote the rock, you're not going to enter into the promised land. And you think Moses said, okay, and walked away? Moses cried and wept to the Lord, please let me go. And God said, no. To me, that's one of the most amazing punishments in all of the Bible. Because when David committed murder and adultery, God didn't remove him. Moses, nobody ever lived like Moses. He was, what would the word be? He had a magneticism about him. Just in battle as a leader, gentle, quiet, tender-hearted, kind. He just lost his temper one time too many. Let's look at that one more time. Go over here to Numbers. They're in the wilderness. They've left Sinai, the mountain of Sinai, in the 10th chapter of Numbers. Now, in this 20th chapter, Miriam, the older sister, dies. And right thereafter, Aaron dies. In this chapter, Miriam and Aaron died. I don't know, it was because they spake against Moses. God could have controlled the mind of these people. Do you understand what I'm saying? Why didn't he? He didn't want to. He had some reason. He wanted, when they wandered through this wilderness, for 40 years. And they come up here. Here's Israel. And they come up here just above. Here's the Dead Sea. And here's the Sea of Galilee. They said it was shaped like a womb. And they called it a womb. And then the Jordan River is winding down from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. And they were somewhere in the neighborhood when they wandered 40 years, and they get up here to somewhere just about the land of Gad, somewhere about where my pointer is right there. And there's some mountains there, and there's a mountain called Pisgah. And God says, Moses, you can't go in. You can look at the land, and that's all you can do. And God took him up on Mount Pisgah, and nobody ever knew what happened to the body of Moses. Nobody knows. And the Bible says in the book of Jude that Satan would not contend, that Michael would not contend with Satan over the body of Moses. And by the way, in the assumption, in the pseudepigrapha, graphe means to write. Graphe means to write. Pseudo means false. It's not that these are false writings. It don't mean somebody didn't write them. I'll write it here. Pseudo. Pseudo means false. Graphe means writings. In the pseudepigrapha, I've got a copy of them at home. I need to bring a copy up here. And it means false writings. This is the Assumption of Moses, the book of Enoch, the book of Judith, and several others in there, the Maccabees. This Maccabees is history. These are believers. These are not inspired Word of God, but they are history just like this. It's a history just like the Josephus thing. So you can read some of these books and get information out of them about the time that they're living in. But in the Assumption of Moses, there is an article in there that says that Michael would not argue with Satan, saying about the body of Moses, about Moses' body, but Michael would simply say, "The Lord rebuked thee." That's in the Assumption of Moses and in the book of Jude. So evidently there's some truths in these books if you can weed through them and pull the truths out. Now, where was I? All right, how much time do I have, Mike? 6? Yes. I'm not going to get to Moses dying this week. I wanted to read you some and challenge you to read some other books like Josephus, Philo. Philo is a historian. I've got the Herodotus. Herodotus is 2 volumes. He is the father. He's called the father of history. He was here long before Josephus. But he has some really interesting things. That's the book that I have read from when in Isaiah the 44th and 45th chapter, when Isaiah talks about the king of Persia, which would be the same thing as Iran, came over here and blocked up the river Euphrates and run it out here into the desert, into the Arabian desert. Well, you've got that in the book of Herodotus and in the 44th and 45th chapters of Isaiah. It's worth having. Now, I don't have any time to get anywhere. Verse 7, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, and Aaron thy brother, and speak unto the rock before their eyes. They were complaining up here where Miriam died in the desert, and the people chid with Moses, and Moses is mad at them because they're arguing with him. And what he does, he loses his temper at the people and does what God says not to do, and God forbids him to go into the land of Israel just because of that. And God says, Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou wilt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord, and he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together from the rock, and he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with the rod he smote the rock twice, and God said, Talk to the rock. That's all. And he had told him over in Exodus 17 and 5 to strike the rock, but not in this case. And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land. And this breaks Moses' heart right here. Which I have given them. This is the water of Meribah. It means quarrel and provocation. It comes from the word marah, which means bitter. My wife's name comes from that, Mary, bitter. This is the water of Meribah, because of the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. And Moses sent message from Kadesh unto the kingdom of Edom. Thus saith thy brother Israel, thou knowest all the travail that hath befallen us. How our fathers went down into Egypt, and we have dwelt in Egypt a long time. And Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried out the Lord, he heard our voice, and sent an angel, and hath brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. And at the end of this chapter, God has Miriam and Aaron both die in the same chapter. They're the ones that murmured against God because Moses married an Ethiopian. I told a black man the other day, I sat in front of the doctor's office, I said, this has nothing to do with black and white. I told him, I told him America's been built on racism, not just with the black man, with the Indian from the start. When Christopher Columbus came here under the orders of the Pope, being a Roman Catholic, and the doctrine of discovery, he said you can kill all those red men you want to if they want to dwell in peace, but they don't own the land. We do. We are white. We're white European Protestant Catholics, and that's what you had to be to destroy the American Indian. And I said we were founded on racism in America. America's never been free for other races other than the white man. And people get mad at me saying that. You know that? Somebody needs to say it. That counts. Seems like a black man can say it and they want to kill him for saying it. When I say it, they don't know what to do. When you actually face the truth and say it, that's when people get mad at you. They don't want to hear that. There is no difference in Christ. There's neither Jew nor Greek. There's neither bond nor free. There's neither male nor female. There's Jew nor Greek. Greek means everything that's not a Jew. The only thing that matters is Christ in a person's heart. That's all. I've run out of time. This has been a kind of an educational type lesson. I wanted you to know there are men that have written things like Philo and Herodotus and Josephus and others. There are men that have written history that will tell us something about the history books. You're not going to get everything. You'll get everything you need out of the Bible, but you won't get all the information that's there. Well, let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Lord, I want to be your man, preaching the truth regardless of the cost. Help this church to feel the same way. Help the people to understand that we have to take a stand for truth regardless of what it costs us. We'll praise you for all things. Lead us to your elect family. You fight our battles because we can't. When we say these things, we can't fight the men that want to fight us. Lord, I'm tired. Give me strength to continue. Help the church to bow to your will and your way and to give you praise for all things. In Christ's name, amen.
Josephus is a heady book. Josephus is a heady book.
It is a heavy book. It's got a lot of details about past history. A lot.
We have it, and I read through it, but
Huh?
I said we have it, and I read through it, but not cover to cover. I just kind of like.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
When you take a section of it, like studying Moses' life and this Ethiopian woman, that's where they jumped on him for something that's not even in the Bible. He was married to an Ethiopian. The point is, don't you complain about what God does with his leaders. Did you try them out, see if they worked?
No, I never did get back over there.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. I'll take them over.
The receipts in there too.
Huh?
The receipts in there too.
Okay. I'll come over tomorrow and make sure they all work.
Okay, he'll probably be over there.
Okay. Okie doke. Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Good.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Can I have gum?
What?
Gum.
What?
Gum.
What?
Gum.
What?
Gum, like a chewy
Huh?
thingy in your mouth.
You what?
A gum. He wants a gum. You know, a chewy thingy in your mouth.
Gum. You want gum? I don't know why. You want me to stick it on your nose?
I want strawberry.
Huh?
I want strawberry.
Yo, strawberry.
Yeah, strawberry.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing,
I'm
Shorty?
great, thank you. Say hi to
Yeah.
Okay.
David, it's good to see you. We love you.
We love it too.
Love you, brother. I do mean that with all my heart. I'm just glad to see a young man your age that's desiring some truth. That really does encourage me. Because there's not many young people want truth. Most people don't want it. You sure you don't want some gum?
I
What?
want strawberry gum. I want strawberry gum.
Why?
I want strawberry gum. Okay.
You call it strawberry, but it's actually watermelon.
Strawberry gum.
Strawberry gum?
Strawberry gum.
Strawberry gum?
Yeah.
You talking about strawberry gum?
Strawberry gum.
Strawberry?
Strawberry gum.
All right. You want some gum?
Yeah, strawberry gum. I want strawberry gum.
Strawberry gum.
Strawberry gum.
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Hey, Rusty, what are you doing?
Just want to thank you for the night. That was really fascinating.
Well, it is to realize these guys
Deep stuff.
the people outside of the Bible, like those historians, knew a lot.
Thanks for your research.
Okay, thank you, brother. Hey, D. D. Dialer. Huh? Don't jump up here, you'll liable to stick that knife in your eye. What do y'all want? Strawberry gum?
I want strawberry gum.
Strawberry gum?
Yeah.
Here, take that. Take that.
Thank you.
And you take that. Here. You want some? You really don't? You're welcome to it.
Maybe you were laying down. Did you have your head down on the table? That's what it is.
My blood pressure's starting to go up.
Oh, boy.
That's what we need, one more with high blood pressure. I took my blood pressure when I would have my dental surgery, and it was pretty high, 170 something over 110. I hope I don't start having trouble.
I do too. I just want to give you a hug.
I love you.
I love you too.
I want people to become educated in a little bit of history by these historians, so they can see a lot of the other details that wasn't put in the Bible. These guys are not boring. It just takes time to read them and study them. I love you.
Yeah. He's getting a
Try out these keys when y'all get home. Dave went and got.
Yeah.
Because he's
For the
got playmates.
downstairs.
He loves going there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try this key out when you get home.
Okay.
Dave went and got him.
Okay, thank you.
Okey finokie.
That's all he talks about. We don't install them.
Well, in fact, I was just gonna ask you. I'd asked her. She said,
What?
"Ask you. Would
Oh.
you like for us to just take him home?"
I got something for y'all.